Well, hey, everybody, this is Doug and Stacey Getzinger. We are Speak Out Loud, and we are coming back tonight for another episode on our new YouTube page. So we are really
Yes.
excited about that and getting
Mm.
to share with you on this new platform. So if you watched last week's video, you'll know that we talked about that Speak Out Loud has been around for several years. Stacey, my wife, Stacey Getzinger, is the primary founder and leader of that. And together, we work together closely, though, to share hope and encouragement for those who are struggling with mental health, with mental illness, and for those who love and support them.
Yeah.
And that's our story, and that's our journey. And we've been doing that for several years on a number of platforms and are now adding YouTube to our list of platforms we're getting to share. So we are really excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we've done is we have about 65 podcast episodes that are available, and they're available on Spotify, Apple, most podcast platforms. You can get those. You can listen. One of the things we're going to be doing is re-releasing some of that podcast content here through YouTube to see if it reaches a new audience, if maybe you haven't had a chance to see or hear that before, but also to share some hope and encouragement to you possibly.
That's right.
But also, we wanted to share some new content. And one of the things that we did when we first started our podcast several years ago is that we just basically told our story. And we split that up over several episodes. And we thought we would redo that a little bit here on YouTube instead of just going back and resharing that from several years ago. What was really our pilot episode on our podcast is that we would share that fresh and anew with you today. The story's the same, but we wanted to come to you together and share that. And I think that's so important, Stacey, because Speak Out Loud really is born out of our story and of your story.
Mm-hmm. And while we're going to say some things that, of course, we had put in our original podcast, there's always a different angle to it. So please don't feel like that if you've been following our Speak Out Loud podcast that you're going to get bored or anything like that. God is an active God, and he also continuously shows us different things and different aspects of our story that we want to share with you that perhaps we're just now learning ourselves. So
that's right. And one of the things I think that's really important to make clear right up front is that as Stacey and I do Speak Out Loud, as she leads that organization, that she and I are not professional counselors. We're not professional therapists, but we do feel like we are experts in our story. And we feel like we can share our story. And if we are authentic and true to that is really just a key way we can bring hope and light into such a dark world of mental illness. One of our taglines for Speak Out Loud has often been just to shine light, to share his light, God's light, into what can be some really dark places, and for some people that are maybe really experiencing some really dark circumstances. So with that, Stacey, let's dive in. And I wanted you just to invite you to go back and share a little bit about where do you feel like this mental illness journey for you possibly began?
Well, I believe that when I was younger, like in elementary school, that little did we know even anything in this world about borderline personality disorder that was spoken of, that began to show up for me as just a worried little girl that struggled with relationships even in elementary school. The tendency for me to worry was obsessive and excessive. And my sister really helped me through that a lot, because I would get in bed at night and there would have been drama at school or anything like that, and I would have been a part of it perhaps, and I would not be able to go home and let go of it. I would really think about it so much that it was just like something that kind of haunted me. So I would get in bed with my sister as a little girl and just say, this is what happened today. Can you help me know how to figure this out for tomorrow so I can go back to school and not be so scared? Nobody was doing anything harmful for me, but of course, bullying has been there forever. And so that's kind of where I think it began, and it just grew and grew the more social I became and the older I got, even through high school, college, and into the now.
Yeah. And that's something you'll hear us talk a lot about is Stacey's diagnosis with borderline personality disorder. Borderline has really defined a lot of things for you, I know, Stacee, and
Mm-hmm.
for us as a family and as a couple, but it's also explained a lot over the years. And I think part of our journey certainly has been, um, just navigating, trying to find understanding, trying to find help, especially going back many years ago to when maybe things weren't as readily available. And I think one of our motivations for Speak Out Loud is to provide some resources, to provide some things that we wish we would have had. And man,
Mm.
we maybe they were there and we just didn't know they existed or we didn't have access to them. But had we known, they would have been potentially so much help and hope to us. So,
Mm.
Stace, let's fast forward a few years in your story to college, because it's college where you and I met.
Right.
And we went to school together,
Mm-hmm.
and we went to a small little Christian college. Stacee and I met, probably, we don't even know for sure, but probably the first 3 or 4 days on
Yes.
campus.
Mm-hmm.
And we became part of the same friend group, and we just were friends for 3 years, and then started dating our senior year, and quickly fell in love and got engaged, and the rest of the story, right? It's just
Right.
all been sunshine and roses. So, but even in college, I think, and I want you to share this, and I'll chime in too, because that's where I first got to know you. But your mental health, your mental illness journey, really was even beginning to take shape and maybe prevent some real challenges for you during that college experience.
Yeah, that's so true. I feel like when I first got to college, I was just so happy to know that I wasn't going to have to move a 14th time. So, growing up, we moved a lot. My dad was in the ministry. So, we were in the ministry and we moved a great deal 5 times in high school, 3 times my senior year. And by the time I got to college, I was just kind of like, okay, if I have jobs here so that I can go to college here, it was expensive, private university. And if I can just take a lot of classes, then maybe nobody will make me leave and have to move to another school or anything like that. I was kind of over that. And at that point, things had really twisted up for me because I had been an okay student. I mean, how great of a student could I have been going to 13 different schools? I mean, in one school would start something when I went to another school, they were just starting it, and so on. So I was academically just kind of confused. But I got to DBU and I was like, you know what? I almost failed high school, failed out of high school. And had been an avid tennis player and everything. And I'd gotten scholarships to go play tennis at some state schools, but I didn't really feel like I should take those opportunities because my mom was just in really critical shape when her and my dad divorced at the middle of my senior year in high school. So when I got to DBU, that was the first time I'd been without my family unit. And not only was I without them, we were all four in totally different places. And well, I did live not far from my mom in Dallas, but when I was in college, but we were all broken apart. And it was just really hard to know that our family had failed as a family unit to stay together. So when I got there, I had a lot to process, and that was before you would say, "Oh, go get a counselor and we'll process this. You can process this with him." And so as I grew in my college experience and everything, the harder I was finding it was for me to outrun all of the things that I had tried to escape when I got to our university.
And I think, just to pause there, Stacee,
Mm-hmm.
without going into a lot of depth, and I know you tell this in many different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and that growing up there had been, yeah, our Diet Coke for today, not Sonic today, but if you're from Oklahoma, you know Brahms, and so Brahms is our Diet Coke and ice cream. But we you had been through really a lot of trauma, and even there's a lot of research today that shows that borderline personality disorder is in many respects an outflow of um, really traumatic experiences, whether that be like you, a lot of family trauma, a lot of family of origin kind of issues,
Mm-hmm.
or other traumatic experiences. So those were some things, and you brought that to the small Christian college, and those of you maybe that have been in that background or experience know there's probably a lot of pressure to look one way on the outside
Mm-hmm.
when there maybe is a lot of things going on the inside. Even though I think you and we had certainly deep, genuine friendships and
Mm-hmm.
relationships,
Yeah.
But those were things. I think that the term "you couldn't outrun" is so powerful because now that we've walked this road together, I know that's what you were feeling. And that
Yeah.
was really just, it was always exhausting because you just were always trying to stay one step ahead, but it just
Yeah.
was getting to be harder and harder.
Well, it was, but all at the same time, I was also having a great time.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
Yeah.
there were lots of events and everything, and I was really living it up at the same time because I was like, uh, this was a new season for me. And so it did become harder for me to hide anything, but it wasn't really intentional hiding. It was just like, what would I say in the first place? I'm at a small Christian university, and divorce hadn't come across any of my conversations with other people. And so I waited as long as possible to tell them that I didn't know if I could really afford to open that Pandora's box, honestly. I felt like that people would be overwhelmed by my story and my situation. And I also felt like that I was embarrassed at that time. I've paid thousands of dollars to realize that it wasn't all my fault, but to just know that we couldn't hold it together was just hard for me to say. It was hard for me to admit.
And like a lot of young people, you really took ownership of that.
I did. I
And that
really did.
was really hard, I know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I look back and realize that was so hard for me now is though I was your friend, I didn't understand that or know that.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it was I think I was just too naive to understand. I'd had a very different upbringing. Part of my kind of journey of understanding and of mental illness was I
Mm-hmm.
remember something that shaped me quite a bit was as a child. I know I'd one time I've never forgotten this. We had gone to a family gathering, and we had a lot of family gatherings, and one of my extended family members was absent, which was a little unusual. And I remember just kept pestering my mom and even my grandparents, "Hey, where's so and so? Why aren't they here? Where's so and so?" And my mother just kind of kept shushing me and saying, "Well, we're not. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about it in front of your grandparents." And essentially, what had happened was one of my extended relatives that would have normally been there had we would call today had a mental health crisis, and in that time frame in vernacular, it might have been a nervous breakdown, is what they said. So my kind of
Mm-hmm.
just whether that I don't think my mother intended this, but what was ingrained in me was kind of like, okay, this is stuff we don't talk about. We don't talk about it outside of family. We don't bring it up because either people are embarrassed by it or they can't handle it or whatever. And so I kind of
Mm-hmm.
just didn't even fully probably appreciate or understand, or wasn't probably mature enough even at that time as your friend to embrace and support you very well.
Mm-hmm.
But I know you talk really powerfully about it was there probably that some of the roots of your anorexia, maybe not even roots, maybe just realities of anorexia,
Mm-hmm.
really also began to take shape too.
Yes. And when I was growing up, we were pretty thin people, and we ate, but at the same time, we were encouraged not to overeat, or we were very athletic. So that was never really much of a concern because we were really, really active physically. But when I got to college, part of being an RA was me getting a residence assistant, was me getting to have 2 free meals a day. And I wasn't as active because I was studying and at my jobs and everything. So I started realizing that my clothes were getting a little snug, and I didn't have a lot of clothes to bring with me. Divorce is expensive, and my mom and I didn't have any money. So when I got to school, I was very limited on what I had to wear. And for girls, that is just like scary. So uh, the more I would try on, the more I would realize I couldn't wear that again. And so soon I got to know a lot of my suite mates and a lot of my roommates and all that kind of stuff on my hall. And we started to share clothes and everything. But that was a real warning sign for me. How come this fit a month ago? And it was because I was eating a healthy amount of food. And when I realized that was starting to happen, I really started to pull back on how the quantity I was eating. But it was so good. I was eating muffin tops, and I was eating, ice cream and yogurt and baked potato bar and all that kind of stuff. And it was just new to my body to have that kind of nutrition. So anyway,
And let's be honest, it was college cafeteria.
it was college
I
cafeteria, all
mean, and
carbs.
there were not, yeah, and there were not like multiple dining options. It was, if you're going to eat on campus and you have a meal plan, here's the cafeteria and here's the
Hours.
cafeteria offerings.
Yeah.
What you take it or leave it, basically.
Yeah.
So,
And I was thankful and everything, but I really enjoyed the social aspect of eating there. It was just a lot of fun. And so when I started to see these changes happen, I really pulled back and I was just like, oh no. So instead of just going a little bit and just going, you know what? I'm going to alter this a little bit. I went to almost eating nothing again in my dorm room. And unless we went off campus or something, and then I was really hungry and I would eat excessively according to what I had been used to, not in the world's view. But anyway, so I really got scared and I started to do that. And then stuff started hanging on me. That was more familiar, but I didn't have the energy to keep up with the things that I was committed to doing. So I know there's a lot said about freshman 15 and all that kind of stuff. In my situation, I don't feel like it was the same. I just feel like it was hard. And I feel like either way, it's hard. Any body changes like that, it can be really, really destructive in my mind.
and I think as we certainly over the years have learned a lot about eating disorders, certainly have been engaged with a lot of therapists. Stacey, in your own personal therapy and recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a chance to serve on the Oklahoma Eating Disorder Association board for a tenure, and really have had a chance to interact with a lot of professionals, some of the top professionals in the world, really on this struggle on this topic. I think going back to them in hindsight, I can see now that certainly there was the genetic things probably built in you. There was a lot of environmental factors, and ultimately just the stress, the trauma, the pressures of what was happening there. All those things just worked together in that time frame to trigger really your anorexia.
Yeah.
Which we're going to get into this for some years. You kind of kept, for lack of a better way of saying it, maybe your thumb on it a little bit. I think part of that was also my denial and not realizing how much it was a struggle for you. But also, there's a time when those tables turn, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too. Um, but to kind of fast forward a little bit more, so you and I started dating our senior year. We fall in love. We get engaged, and we got about 6 months after we graduated.
It was almost that fast too.
It was pretty fast.
It was pretty fast.
It was fast, just because we had been friends for so long. But we did get married after about 6 months after college and our graduation, partly because we had no money and we had to find jobs. And so I found part-time work. She became a teacher, so I was on her coattails for a while there, going to graduate school and different things. But I'd say we get married. We were married, and a couple years into our marriage, we had a surprise pregnancy, and it was our first pregnancy. And about 4 months in, I guess, somewhere around that time frame, like many couples, you had a miscarriage.
Yeah.
And it was a very, certainly a very traumatic experience for both of us. I would say, particularly for you. And I don't want to, because don't minimize the impact that had. But I think that the trauma for both of us was that we also dealt with it very differently. We were just like, I think about a month shy of our 25th birthday when this happened. I know, looking back, for me, I probably didn't have the emotional depth, maturity to really, one, deal with it well, but also to be there for you. But talk a little bit about that, because I think when you used that phrase earlier about always kind of just trying to outrun, this maybe was one of those times of like, hey, the first few years of marriage, and we think, okay, this maybe will get me out of my past and out of the trauma of my past. But here, I know it just, for you, I've heard you say, it felt like just bad things kind of kept catching up.
That's so true. Really, we had wanted to wait a little bit longer to have a child, and we were excited to do that. But at the same time, we were just trying to kind of get our feet underneath us and see. I know you're never fully ready to have a baby, but no matter what, we we got pregnant. And
How'd that happen, by the way?
I
Oh,
don't,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
okay, anyway. But he when we found out we were pregnant, we instantly got very excited, and I was very sick. I was sick with all three of our pregnancies and our children. And um, when we realized further in that the baby wasn't getting very strong, getting bigger but not getting strong, the heartbeat was not doing really well. It wasn't normal. And around that time, I also had a severe car accident, a lot of internal bleeding and things going on with that. And also, I wasn't hardly eating at all, thus, probably the horrible sickness all the time. So, all those things culminate and come together. And I'm like, I didn't prepare. I didn't take care of myself while I was carrying him. And then I had the car accident, which kind of ended it all. I carried him for 2 more weeks after that. And then I had to have 2 DNCs in order to take him because he was just getting a little bit bigger. And so when that happened, I can tell you that my eating disorder just flew in stronger than ever, as if I wasn't already not eating. We already knew that I had eating disorder. We weren't sure how deep it was, but now we did, because I was really not eating at all. I was so depressed. I was so sad. And yes, we did grieve very differently. We both grieved. But I would say to this day, now that when we meet people who have experienced something similar to us, that they would probably agree that we really hadn't truly mourned the loss of a child. Yeah. We just tried again to keep going, and we were tripping all over the place. But in with that, we weren't supposed to even try to get pregnant for another year. And in that year, you would think that we would kind of get things together and stuff and get on the same page, but we really didn't. And so, yeah.
I think that, well, one, I think that certainly for a lot of reasons and a lot of support, there is. I mean, this was close to 30 years ago for us. That it was a lot more support today. Again, not for us to play the victim or to blame anything. I just don't think there was great context for people to talk about that or to step in and say, I've told people if there was ever a 25-year-old couple that was in need of some therapy, it was probably us. And yet we were really far from that, partly because I was also serving part-time in a church. And I think there was this weird blend of denial, pride, kind of cultural perceptions pressing in on us that hey, if in that kind of a role, you can't step out and get, how you don't need help, or how do you, something must really be wrong with you if you're asking for some sort of mental health counseling or therapy. Yet how desperately we both needed that for ourselves, for our relationship probably. And it was a really difficult time in our marriage and in our relationship. And one way I've looked at it and thought about, this is kind of helped me understand this better. My internal mantra, I know, was just, hey, we just got to keep pressing on. Things are going to get better. And I think that was some of the naivete possibly I had brought from a little bit of this very traditional upbringing. Certainly not a perfect family, but stable family. Grew up in a small town, lived there till I went to college. Intact parents. Parents that in some respects might have been kind of boring. They weren't real social. But they both had good jobs, and they were just kind of that traditional middle class, kind of very stable existence. And so Stacee and I really brought very different perspectives to things. And so up until that time in my life, the worst thing that ever happened to me is being cut from a baseball team. And then I bounced back a year later and made the team. And I realized for Stacee's upbringing, that is so minuscule compared to the trauma that you experienced really most of your entire life up to this point. Yeah. That when I think now, I was like, I just kept saying pressing forward. I feel like I was the guy just kind of bouncing around at the front of maybe of a marathon. And I'm trained and I'm ready. And I'm just like, hey, let's go. Let's run. And you're at that same starting line there with me. This is how distant and maybe just I didn't understand and didn't hear you well. And you're looking at me like, don't you get it? I've already run 5 marathons. I'm exhausted. I don't know if I can do this again. And I think that's kind of how we approached that. And that created some real challenges. And I think it led you probably into deeper struggles with both anorexia, and then over time, some other things really began to develop.
Yeah.
So let's kind of hit that pin right there and put a pin in that, and move us ahead a few more years ahead. And by this time, probably our early 30s, we do have two young children. We have two daughters we've been incredibly blessed with and by, um, and we're serving full time in a
Mm-hmm.
church. We've moved to Oklahoma,
Mm-hmm.
and we're serving full time in a church. And I think that, again, just these things that I kept feeling like, okay, hey, we've gotten past that. This whole anorexia thing, it's in the past. That was a lot of probably just denial and wishful thinking on my part.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of things that I think you were feeling like, again, and maybe as our daughters got to an age where they were at an age where you had memories of a lot of traumatic things from your life,
Mm-hmm.
um, this is catching up. I can't keep outrunning it. I'm getting exhausted outrunning it. So maybe
Yeah.
for several years there, just talk about what was going on,
Mm-hmm.
and what really became some really deep mental health, I think, challenges you faced.
Yeah, I remember one day when Riley was 2 and Shelby was 5, so she was headed into kindergarten. And I dropped her off I went in and got her to the playground and everything. And as Riley and I were leaving the school in our car, I look out and Shelby is standing there by herself. Well, she had just gotten there, but for some reason, in a matter of seconds, there were people. She saw her friends and she went and ran and played. But at that moment, I remembered it just triggered something in me like, that's how you felt. You felt so alone. Um, I had stomach aches when I was little. I really struggled to have good attendance. And then with the moves and everything, it just snowballed into really difficult thoughts and memories. And so when I left that day, that just like started this downfall of, you know, I really do need a break. I need help. I need a break. I can't run anymore. My legs feel so tired. And so I reached out to our pastor's wife at that time, and she began to talk with me some about it and everything. And I had this perfectionistic thought in my mind that you will succeed as a minister's wife, and you will be the best at it, and you will be a wonderful Christian mom, and we will keep up, and we will look right, and we will present well. And it just kind of stopped after that. And from that point on, I really just feel like it was me just kind of sitting in the gravel. I realized where I was, and Doug had seen me overcome a lot of things with God's help. And this one, I just wasn't. I was just stuck and still and hurting. And I really just needed a minute, and there wasn't a minute to be had. Um,
And I think that I certainly didn't fully understand and was blind to, just out of denial, possibly, that things were not getting better. And I think I kept thinking, oh, it's been a tough week, it's been a tough month. In youth ministry where we were serving at the time, summers were really intense between camps and mission trips and all kinds of youth activities. Well, maybe it's just a tough season. Let's get past this season, and things are going to get better.
right.
Just again, just kind of stuck in that denial of, hey, things are going to get better. It's just things are going to get better. All the while, you're really in this downward
Mm-hmm.
spiral that was becoming this. I think your eating disorder was really just ensnaring you more, if that's even the right way
Yeah,
to
I was
say
just
it.
malnourished, and you can't think right when you're malnourished.
Yeah, which was then playing into a growing, I think, just overall sense, really a battle with depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what was really topping it off was that we were in ministry,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of struggles, certainly financial stress, and I think for you it was like, this is feeling way too familiar
Mm-hmm.
to like some very traumatic experiences
Mm-hmm.
from when you were a child and a teenager.
Well, and I remember something hitting me one night at church, and it was this: church had started, and I went in to hand Riley to the nursery worker precious Mama Lou, and I handed her over, and I thought, these people feed my children more than I do.
Mm.
And that really stuck with me. I kept passing them off. And I was just like, I don't want to do that anymore. And I was getting more to where I wasn't showing up. I went from really showing up and being present to kind of the poster child walking around the church of anorexia and deep, deep depression. And I had pulled back from responsibilities with the teenagers, and I really needed to do that. I was making bad choices, and they were seeing that happen. And so that was definitely not okay. So I really pulled back from that. So I stopped showing up at things, and people were scared and they didn't know what to do with me. And I didn't either. But we just knew that Doug had his MDiv, a 97-hour MDiv from seminary, and he knew languages and different things like that. But what were we going to do if we did stop doing this? What were we going to do? And he taking care of our family, being the sole supporter financially and everything, I saw what he was going through. And really, what I want to stop and say right here is that when you hear Doug talk, you hear him say a lot about, I was in denial. I was, I didn't realize what was going on. I kept us in a dangerous spot and different things like that. But we were 27 years old, 28 years old,
Sure.
trying to navigate how to put food on the table and not lose our job and invest in a lot of teenagers whose parents really wanted us to help fix them. And it was our joy to do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we were taking on a lot of roles that aren't really necessary or not expected in today's ministry. So if you're one who is just like helping to kind of unravel and see what actually looks like now and a little bit further in, you've got to give yourself some grace and mercy in that. You didn't know.
Sure.
You just didn't know.
Well, and yeah, we didn't know. And I think that one of the things we often say is that a lot of the things that we're able to share today,
Mm-hmm.
we learned the hard way.
Yeah.
And we had to learn the hard way, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move just a little bit more forward. I think that the key word that you were talking about there is just that spiral. And we were spiraling, and you were spiraling. And I look back now and I realize that there was a number of times Stacee's looking at me almost with just desperation in her eyes. And it's kind of like, can you hear me? Will you hear me and understand how much pain I'm in? And I just didn't. I didn't understand how much pain you were in. I think that maybe for those of you that maybe love someone that struggles with mental illness, that's why we both do this together and we both share, because we can bring both those perspectives. I think it really is hard to understand. I still to this day can't fully understand what Stacee talks when she talks about how painful her mind is can be. But at the same time, I can definitely grow, and I have grown in empathy and my
100%.
care and support. So just take hope and encouragement from that. But I think that we came to a place, and I just remember this was like such a huge, momentous, it felt like, step we took, that that you had started professional counseling and therapy. Maybe just about a month in, you had started seeing a psychiatrist also. They had just started prescribing you for the first time ever some different medicines that, as we found out later, were actually doing some more harm than good, because it was the wrong medicine really that had been prescribed. But we won't say how long ago it was, but it was in the fall of that year. We really, what maybe had been like, maybe I hadn't felt this way to you, but I know it'd been like we'd been on this gradual kind of descent for several years, even this spiraling down. But then we hit the cliff, and really we came to a really intense crisis moment, for you particularly, for both of us. And you might just even speak into that. Just if you want to say about that,
Sure.
that day, that night.
Yeah, and we're going to leave you guys with this because there's so much more to the story. But one thing is, I remember just getting increasingly more angry every Saturday night, just about before we got out of the ministry. I would be in the garage because I didn't want to hear the girls. I didn't want the girls to hear me crying. I didn't want to scare them. And they had so many friends at church, so many friends that quickly afterwards were not there anymore after we did get out of the ministry, which was devastating for two little girls. But I would sit in the garage and cry, and I would beg, Doug, can we please, please stop this? Can we please get out of the ministry so I can have a chance to see if I can have any success in being here and being a wife and a mom that I wanted to be so, so bad. And I could see why it was frustrating him, was because he didn't know what we were going to do if we didn't. And so, as time went on and everything, I began to write in journals, and they were journals full of hate and meanness towards myself and our situation. They were angry at God, all the words were, and I had probably 7 of them. And I was just like, you know what? You can't hear me? I'm going to stop talking, and I'm just going to write it all down. And one night when I took the girls to gymnastics, Doug and I were going to meet there. So they were little bitty still, like 5 and 8. And I said, I'll meet you there. But instead of meeting him at the gym, I got the girls settled, and they were in their classes. And I took those 7 journals, and I drove so fast the wrong way on a road. And God spared me, obviously, and I'm so thankful for that. Has that been the end of suicidal ideation and self-harm? No, you would think, but no, it is not. But that attempt was the biggest one, and I'm just so thankful that God did spare me. But when we reunited, he saw what I'd been writing, and I think it was just so scary and sad. It wasn't like he was mad at me for writing these things at all. He was just like, this is much deeper than than I ever imagined. And soon after, I went and got inpatient treatment so I could get stabilized on the correct medication. I was fighting so hard without medication. They said, let us try to take a little bit of this off of you. Medication does not take the problem away. It helps take the edge off so that I can even fight. And while we're not advocates for medication in our story, it's a very big part of the story, so that way I can accept the help and I can accept what God's telling me.
And we'll certainly talk a lot more about that as all of our story unfolds and as we have a chance to share more. Mm-hmm. But I think that certainly, the medications you're on, and we recognize for many people that's a choice between them and their doctors, their families. But I know in our situation that it's best been described to us as it just gives you kind of not even necessarily an even playing field, but more of an even playing field. You're not maybe running uphill every time to try to deal with this. That night was a big probably wake up call, certainly. And I think that many times I look back, and we always I did this, push things up to the edge where it's almost too late. I remember specifically, Stacey, you just kind of looking at me, and the feeling I had was, I'm watching you from the shore. You're out in the water, and you're drowning. You're being drug under by all these things that you don't understand. I don't understand. This concoction of depression, anorexia, what probably were outflows also of borderline personality. All those things were just beginning to scratch the surface and get some help on. And you're drowning. And I remember feeling like the guy on the shore, that I didn't have a life preserver to throw you.
Yeah.
And I can tell you at the time, I didn't know how to swim in those waters. And it was just terrifying to me as well. And we're going to wrap up here and pick back up with a part 2 of our story. And, but I would say this, that while Stacey, as you've described, that night was not where your mental illness journey began. It really began much, much earlier, much younger, born out of a lot of family dysfunction, trauma. I would say, and to give you all a teaser, that night is where your and our recovery journey began.
Yeah.
That's still ongoing and that we're still a part of. And so we want to invite you back, because we're going to share more about that. And hopefully, if you're walking a similar road, something that we're sharing and something that Stacey's out of her experience, you can connect with. And because I know you used that phrase about feeling alone. And that was been the hardest thing of our entire mental illness journey, is the times when we've just felt completely alone.
Mhm.
And so we don't want you to feel alone.
Right.
Hopefully you can see and know that there are others that that also have been, not maybe not the exact same place, but on a similar road,
Mhm.
and there is hope there. And so,
Yeah.
Stacee, one of the things we like to do as we close out our podcast episodes is talk about hope, and always in an episode of talking about hope. Um, so today I want to invite you to do that, but I want to invite you to talk about your life verse, which really out of this experience has become something that you strive to live by and has really been meaningful and powerful to you.
Sure. I love so many verses, but this one is brief but so hard. So when you know this is a verse that God really uses to kind of really guide my life, and it comes from Psalm 118:17, and it says, I will not die, but live and proclaim what the Lord has done. And it's hard because the commitment to say, I will not die, because we know that that is for God to decide when we are born and when we are to die, but live and not just exist, which is very hard. I'm going through a big medication change right now, and it's so hard just to go, okay, I'm going to do more than just exist. And that's okay for a little while. I'm just trying to work that out, walk that out, and everything. And then I'm going to proclaim what the Lord has done. And we've spoken today about silence. We've talked today about not being understood and misunderstood. So instead of it being the basically the do not talk podcast, it's the speak out loud. Everything we do in our nonprofit is speakoutloud.me.
Well, that's where the name
Yeah,
is
it's
born
the
out of,
opposite.
is that verse right
Yeah.
there.
So this next weekend being Easter is so exciting. One reason is because people, you may be one of these people, go to church that may not go to church any other time of the year other than maybe perhaps Christmas. So I'm encouraged to see all that God does when people enter church doors that maybe aren't used to going to church. And then also, our daughters will be here and our son-in-law, and we're so excited for that. Doug always hides about 100 Easter eggs all over the front and backyard. We have a big yard, and this year we're going to have to take pictures of all of them because around the number 75 we can't find the rest. Right. So anyway, we're going to do that. But there's so much hope in realizing that Jesus died on a cruel cross, and then 3 days later he rose again. And so we do not serve a God who is a statue. We do not serve a God that we have to conjure up in our minds, but we serve a living God. And he came back so that he could save us from the things that we do that are against his word. And so I'm so thankful to be able to do that. If you would like more information about that, please go to speakoutloud.me, any of our stuff, and DM me, send a message, something like that, and I will help you through that. But it's just hopeful knowing that you care about our journey and that we care about you. It's a win-win situation. So yeah, lots of hope.
Well, and Stacee, I think that I'm so glad when I think about that verse that all those years ago that you didn't die on that night, and just all that God has done in our life, in your life, through your life since then, and all that's left. So we are super thankful for that. We hope that that is hopeful for you as well. We are so glad if maybe you found Speak Out Loud for the first time, you're checking us out. We're really thrilled that you're here, and we'd invite you to follow along on all the different other places that we have a chance to speak and to share hope. And you can follow Stacee particularly on the socials at speakoutloud.me, both on Instagram and Facebook, and some great resources, great information, great just consistent weekly, almost daily messages of hope there. You can find both of Stacee's books. The first one is called You Are Worth Saving, Letters of Hope from a Desperate Heart. And the second one that she just published last fall is entitled The Boat That Wouldn't Sink, which really talks a lot about the trauma and the story that brought her into college and the beginnings of her mental illness journey, but also the rescue and the hope that's come out of that. You can find both those books on Amazon. We'd love for you to get a hold of those. I think they'll be great sources of hope for you. And as we share here, you can also go to any other podcast platform, look for the Speak Out Loud podcast, and hear lots of our conversations, but also lots of chances we've had to interview mental health professionals, doctors, therapists, a lot of experts in the field over the last several years, bringing and sharing both information, but every episode seeking out, bringing out hope. If you'd like to dive into more of our story, we had a chance several months ago to sit down with a friend of ours, Susie Gurley, who is the host of the Just a Mom podcast. Great podcast. We'll put this in some of the information on the notes here with the YouTube version. And we had a chance for about 2 hours to share our story, and she released that earlier this year over the course of several weeks in a multi-part episode. So you can find that if you want to just dive in right away and hear more of our story and hear 2 hours of us getting to share that and discuss
it's cut
that
into
with
3 different episodes, though. You don't
3
have
episodes. And Susie's actually a high school friend of mine that Stace's become friends with. We've had a chance just to partner with in a number of ways in sharing hope and encouragement for those maybe that have walked the road we're on or something similar. So until next time, we will see you next week with more of this story. We're so glad to be getting now to share with you, YouTube. And thanks for listening, guys. God bless
It's
y'all.
an honor to serve you.